saying yesterday that the ceasefire is on massive life support, President Trump is now downplaying the need for help in reaching a deal with Tehran. Listen.
Do you think President Xi can help and contribute to a deal with Iran?
He could. I mean, it might be.
Yeah.
I don't think we need any help with Iran, to be honest with you. They're defeated militarily, and they'll either do the right thing or we'll finish the job.
And Kristen Holmes already ahead of the president there in Beijing for his arrival. So good to have you on the ground there to witness all of it. Upbeat about this trip in terms of deals done, of what's on the president's checklist here.
Well, we know that he's traveling with a number of America's top CEOs. Tim Cook is going, Elon Musk is going. So there will be some private sector deals that we expect to come out of this. And additionally, we believe that the two sides will talk about the price of soybeans, trying to negotiate a deal there, as well as the buying of commercial jetliners, the U.S. actually selling those jetliners to China. Now, that's just some of what's on the agenda. They also are going to have conversations about trade, tariffs, how to keep this kind of relationship that they've built on from October when they met in person back in Korea going the same direction. But there is still this looming issue of the war on Iran that is really hovering over this entire meeting. And that's why you saw President Trump try to push this meeting 6 weeks. He believed the war in Iran would be over by then and they wouldn't have this kind of hanging over the trip. And you heard President Trump talking about how he's going to have a long talk about Iran, but also saying he wasn't sure that he needed President Xi's help. We have been told by a number of officials that President Trump and his team are expected to push President Xi and the Chinese officials to try and push Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or at least come to a deal. And of course, we know that just before this trip, one of Iran's chief negotiators came here and was meeting with their counterparts in China, likely laying out what their bottom line is on negotiations. And there are many analysts, particularly in the U.S., who believe that this war in Iran has put President Trump at a weaker position than he was back in October because of the fact that he's going to likely need to ask for help, and that weaker position could impact those business deals. Now, we do expect some business deals to still come out of this. That is what President Trump is touting. And we really know that the person who's been kind of leading this trip and the conversations around this trip ahead of the actual departure to China has been the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. He has said time and time again that he's been in touch with his counterparts. They've been talking about trade. They've been talking about deals. And he, of course, will be on this trip. Now, surprisingly, in addition to Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegsman, in time, as the United States is getting more and more frustrated, President Trump is getting frustrated, this idea of contemplating potential combat missions, restarting them in Iran, and of course the fact that this is going to be a topic of discussion.
Yeah, good to have you on the ground there and reporting. And as you said, the fact that this is going on in the middle of this Iranian conflict, again, an extraordinary moment for this summit to take place. Kristen Holmes for us on the ground in Beijing. Thanks so much. We do want to bring
the imbalances, the structural imbalances that China is running with the rest of the world, which is causing a lot of the push towards protectionism. Instead, we're focused on quite pragmatic transactional issues like selling airplanes and selling soybeans. And I get the Trump administration's frustration with not being able to change China's long-term economic strategy. But these underlying issues do need to be addressed at some stage, or they could be the roots of a major crisis.
And I will get to that in a moment. Just going on to those commercial deals, though, you say one thing that will definitely happen here, likely, is this new U.S.-China Board of Trade. You argue it could be the most substantive achievement. What would it look like, and how would it align with what you describe as the mutual self-interest, of course, between what are two economic rivals at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think what we're finding is that the administration is pursuing a very pragmatic transactional approach of saying, let's create a board of trade that discusses what $30 or $40 billion of products they're going to buy from the United States and what products of an equal amount we're going to buy from China. I think the good news about that is it gives us an opportunity to say what's strategic and what's non-strategic. And can we lower tariffs on non-strategic goods that are raising the costs that are facing American families on T-shirts or shoes or the basics of everyday living. On the other hand, it really is managed trade. It's not really dealing with the underlying imbalances, which Secretary Bessent has rightfully said is the most serious issue facing the global economy. So at some point, we got to get to those major issues about about China moving away from excess capacity, export-led growth, and doing the domestic reforms necessary to have a more balanced growth strategy around services, domestic demand, consumer demand. And that's what they've been avoiding for decades. And I think it's really coming back to roost.
You know, again, I mentioned that given the laundry list that you just pointed out there, all of it high stakes, and yet now we have this Middle East conflict. On Iran, are you hopeful China can and is willing to play a constructive role? Or do you get a sense that really it is in their best interest if this is prolonged the next few months? And that might sound counterintuitive given how much energy comes out of the Strait of Hormuz and goes directly into China.
Well, no country has a greater interest in seeing oil flow more freely through the Straits of Hormuz than China. On the other hand, I think they're taking some comfort in seeing the U.S. get bogged down there and significant military assets being moved, including from the Indo-Pacific to the Middle East. And so I think the Trump administration will try and press them. And to a certain degree, the Trump administration has some leverage because it's one thing for the Iranians to control the Straits, but we're also blockading. And so we're preventing those tankers that could go to China from getting through. And there seems to be some kind of deal to be had there if China ultimately views it in its interest to do so. It's got a lot of oil stockpiled. It's prepared for this kind of moment, but ultimately it needs that oil out of the Middle East to power its economy and to power its growth.
Are they a key to a deal right now? And do you think we'll see the fruit of that in the next few weeks?
I have my doubts. I think they're willing to let things play out a little bit longer and see whether the U.S. has the staying power to remain in the Middle East, or whether the U.S. Cuts a deal with Iran and allows Iran to go back to its corner and without a fundamental resolution of the underlying issues.
Given you were at the table on so many of these issues with China, in terms of those long-term disputes that you were discussing, they will linger beyond this summit. You say there is a difference between measured cynicism and complacency. You know, you keep talking about the fact that this is going to continue to fester. If it continues to fester, it's going to boil over. What could that look like? And do you really think the Trump administration is going to take this on?
Well, I think they'd like to try and maintain stability as long as possible, and the Chinese would too. I think stability is the watchword of the summit. Neither side wants to have a major conflict at the moment, but in doing so, to a certain degree, we're sweeping issues under the rug that we're going to have to deal with down the road. If you just take the economic side of things, China is producing now somewhere north of 30% of all the global manufactured product in the world, and it's heading towards 50%. That's a huge amount, and it squeezes out the manufacturing aspirations not only of the United States and Europe, but of major emerging economies who also want to have a manufacturing sector. That ultimately can't continue to grow along this trajectory. They can't continue to grow manufactured exports so much faster than global demand without there ultimately being a problem.
As we come on the air tonight, Air Force One is in the air en route to Beijing, and President Trump will arrive in China just hours from now. And sources say that from a bruising trade war to the actual war playing out still with Iran, it's a packed agenda as he prepares to sit down with Xi Jinping. But in the hours before his departure, the president's mind appeared to be elsewhere. He posted and reposted dozens of times overnight and into the morning. This is just a few of those that we saw playing out in this overnight spree. Most of them centered around traditional grievances and debunked conspiracy theories, the 2016 election, the Russia investigation, the 2020 election, Barack Obama's birth certificate. But this repost from the president stood out.
President Trump's on his way to Beijing. Once there, he will hold talks, of course, with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Before he left Washington, Mr. Trump said he expects to have a long talk with the Chinese president about the Iran war, despite yesterday when he said the ceasefire is on massive life support. The US president, is now downplaying the need for help in reaching a deal with Tehran.
Do you think President Xi can help and contribute to a deal with Iran?
He could. I mean, it might be. Yeah. I don't think we need any help with Iran, to be honest with you. They're defeated militarily, and they'll either do the right thing or we'll finish the job.
Gideon Rachman is the chief foreign affairs commentator at the Financial Times. He wrote an op-ed this week entitled "A Weakened Trump Arrives at Xi's Court." He may be weakened, Gideon, but How does, what are the dynamics when the two sit down?
Well, look, I think that the Chinese do not necessarily want a confrontation with him. If anything, they would like a more stable US-Chinese relationship. So I don't expect Xi to, crow about the difficulties that America